Welcome back, podcast fans. I'm your host, Annette Hines, and this is Parenting Impossible, the Special Needs Survival Podcast. We have a super interesting show for you today. I am so excited to present Joanne De Simone to you. She has a book coming out on Tuesday. It'll be a few weeks before this podcast airs, so it'll be out for a little bit when you get this, but it's called Fall and Recovery, Raising Children with Disabilities Through Lessons Learned in Dance. And I am super fascinated by this topic. Let me just tell you a little bit about Joanne, and we'll have some more information in the show notes, but she has degrees in dance and special education. So she's really living in that intersection between, disability and dance, which is fascinating to me. And she danced professionally with several companies. But then she dedicated her life to teaching children with disabilities and supporting their families, which is amazing. She's currently a special education advocate for the Alliance of Private Special Education Schools of North Jersey. Blah, it's Friday and I can't really talk today. And she has writing that has appeared in the Washington Post, Exceptional Parent Magazine, and the Rumpus, plus other publications. She's a contributing author to Barriers and Belonging, Personal Narratives of Disabilities, and Joanne and her son, Sebastian, were instrumental in a legislative change allowing students with intellectual disabilities to participate in NCAA D3 sports. I am very proud of you for doing that. It is hard to take on institutions. Welcome, Joanne. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here.
So I could talk for a lot more time about all of Joanne's credentials. She has done a lot and she is continuing to do more. I really just want to kind of start at the beginning where you have two sons with disabilities. And, you're in our world, right? You have talked a little bit about that life-changing moment. Can you just tell me a little bit about that?
There were several.
So you're in the pediatrician's office.
That one, yes, for sure. Yeah. So my son Benjamin is my first son. We took him into the pediatrician's office when he was 1 week old, standard visit. And the doctor put the measuring tape around his head and he said, his head size is a little small. And then he looked at me and he said, but your head size is a little small. So maybe all is fine. We'll just keep track of it. And he and my husband, left the room and went to go sit in the consultation room while I was dressing Benjamin. And I just, in my whole body, I knew, like, there was no brushing this off.
Yeah.
I knew that this was not going to be the journey I expected it to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, you're on the path. And so as you start down that path, I'm sure you've had so many experiences that have shaped you. Was it after that you entered into the special education field?
No, I was a special educator before I had children.
Oh, amazing. Okay. So
Right,
that's
right.
very interesting. Did you feel that you were prepared as a
No.
parent? No, of course not. I knew that was going to be the answer.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, everyone makes that assumption. Oh, you were in the field. You got this. Like, he's in good hands. It's all good. And I've heard you talk about this before, right? You get to that side of the table. And I remember like the first IFSP meeting that I sat down, I just was so struck that number one, I was like, oh, I didn't really understand parents until
Yeah.
now. It was a reality check. And I was like, I have all this knowledge and experience. What do parents who don't have a master's in special education do? How do they manage this system?
Yeah, truly. I mean, as an attorney, if I could be brought to tears at this table where they're talking about my daughter and where we all know she needs XYZ and they're just not going to pay for it. Why are they making me fight so hard for things that are, very much in the realm of possibility for her? These are all the people that have been charged with, being the experts and the team for your child. It's a tough, bitter pill to swallow sometimes.
It is. And on the flip side, too, we were lucky. Like we landed in some good hands right from the start. And they were just throwing stuff at us. And I was like, oh my God, he's so disabled. They're giving us the whole book, like
Mm,
so, still in the early stages, was still trying to be hopeful about what his progress would look like.
sure.
And getting all that support was a little daunting, actually, because I thought, uh-oh, yeah, we're in trouble. We're
Like
in
they know
trouble.
more than you do
Right.
about what this is going to look like. And you're
Right.
trying to figure out what they're not saying to you.
Right.
But
Exactly.
after a few years of that, and you sit through those meetings, and it's another one where they're like, Benjamin is so kind and he is so sweet to have in class. Okay, but what is he learning?
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, in Benjamin's situation, he's really multiply disabled. He's nonverbal. He has cerebral palsy. He now has a feeding tube, but he never really did anything physically independent. So it was a challenge of always trying to appreciate, all the minor strides.
Yeah.
You really learn how to look for and appreciate those things in a way you never thought was possible.
It completely shapes your idea of success, right? What does it
Yes,
mean to be
yes,
successful? And you come from a highly technical background and where success is very measurable as a dancer, right?
right. Yes, absolutely.
And it's
And I was
always,
always hard on myself, type A all the way. Like,
those are the worst ways to be when you're parenting a
yes.
disabled child, because you're
Uh-huh.
never going to win. You're never going to have that perfect outcome, and you're always going to set those goals too high.
And there's so much self-blame. And the culture sets us up for that, right? I
Oh, sure.
can't. It's like when they were little, I remember, it was always something coming out in the news. Oh, your child, if you took, Tylenol, or if you used this cleaning product, or
Mhm.
then your kid, that's why they're disabled. And I'm like, stop blaming the mommies. Can we just
Yeah,
step back?
right, right. Well, tell me a little bit about, let's take a step back to the time frame where you are dancing and you shift and you decide to get a master's in special education and move into this field. What brought you to that?
Yes. So in college, at towards the end of my college days, I had the really great fortune of having this experience of dancing. Uh, it's called "There Is a Time," which was a dance choreographed by Jose Limon, and
Mhm.
it completely changed my life. And I knew like this was the path I wanted to be on. I had to study Limon, and I wanted to dance with that company. And my teacher at Hunter College was in the company, so he was just a mentor to me. So I fell in love with this technique, and that was it. And the problem was I limited myself. Even though I did do other things, I was so focused on doing this. I was so sure that was my destiny. And I
Mhm.
did have the opportunity of touring with them. But then when there was an opportunity to, audition for a spot, a secure spot in the company, they didn't take me.
Oh,
And it was just a moment like I left the audition knowing that they were going to pick someone else. And it was just, I was standing in the hallway waiting for the elevator, and I was like, I'm never coming back here. I'm done. And I
oh,
can't, it was so fast. It was like, oh, I hate to think of myself as the kind of person who could fall out of love with something in a flash, but that's how I felt in the moment. And so leaving that, I was struggling. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I was teaching. I was teaching dance and gymnastics, which I had been doing since I was 14. And what started to dawn on me, a lot of the kids that were taking my classes had different types of disabilities. There were lots of kids with ADHD, with some mild, physical disabilities. Parents would be like, oh, the teachers say we have to send them to a movement class. And here we are. And
Mm.
I felt really fulfilled by that. Like the kids making progress was just, it felt so good. And I thought, I want to really understand what I'm doing. I don't want to have just random success. So,
Yeah.
it did take some time. It was, maybe a year or so, but then it clicked and I said, you know what, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to get a degree in special education and I'm going to work with kids that have disabilities. That's what it is.
Awesome. I as someone who had that calling, I completely get it and understand. And my daughter, Caroline, my younger daughter, non-disabled daughter, had a similar experience with dance. She didn't get
Mm.
as far as you, but she danced for 10 years and we actually homeschooled for several years while she was doing some touring and different things. And focused on dance like 40 hours a week,
Yeah.
a lot for little ones. So from age 3 to age 13, and all of a sudden it started to get very competitive and you needed to
Mm.
be applying for these summer programs and things like that. And she just had a moment of clarity, like, I'm not having fun anymore. I don't want to do.
Mhm.
And I was like, wow, I mean, you dedicated 10 years and you always told me how much you wanted to do this and how much you wanted to be here. And I think about the thousands of hours and tens of thousands of dollars we spent,
Yeah.
which were not easy to come up with because I had the other very profoundly disabled daughter that I was taking care of. But really, I totally get that. Like it stops being fun. It stops, really being your joy, and it's time to do something else. So,
Yes.
uh, with that background that you have though, and then, now you've got these two kids and you're navigating this as a parent. And as you said, it's a completely different experience to be on the other side of the table. How are you, merging your professional and your personal experiences to come up with this amazing journey that you're on?
Yeah, I feel like there's three parts, right? There's parenting, there's dance, there's special education. And for a long time, I think that my way of dealing with things was to go into action mode. So it wasn't just like, oh, okay, kids got a problem, I got to fix it. It was, I need a plan of action so that I feel like I'm succeeding as a human being, right? So that had a lot to do with all my background in special education. I knew
Mhm.
how to navigate the system. And as the kids got older, they really shifted my path. So I was working in preschool when Ben was born, and I took off 2 years because we really weren't sure he was going to live that long. The survival rate was like 2 years when he was born back in 1999. So I took time off. And
I
then
understand. 96,
yes,
my daughter. Yeah.
yes, yes.
Different
See,
time, completely different time.
yes, exactly. So, he stabilized and went to a school program, a center-based program, half day, and then half day was home with early intervention services. And the early intervention team that was working with him, like he went into the program, school program, and they called me up and said, "You're coming back to work. You're going to work for us." And I was like, "No way." They were like, "Yes, yes, you have to do this." So shift. I morphed. Okay, I'm not a classroom teacher. Now I'm working one-on-one in the homes with families. And I completely fell in love with that
Oh, so
because,
cool. Yeah.
first of all, who doesn't love babies? I love babies, right? So
Yeah.
that was great. And
There's so
I
much
found,
promise, right?
oh,
There's so
yeah.
much, everything is open at that time. There's so much hope. There's so much joy, but please
But for the
continue.
families, there's also a lot of pain, right? But I really loved being there to support them in that moment because I
Yeah.
knew what that moment felt like. And I really liked helping teach them how to navigate the system and how to advocate, and
Mhm.
so that they could feel more confident and stronger and successful themselves.
Yeah.
So that was another part of it. And then after I had Sebastian and he was diagnosed with autism, it put me on a completely new path.
Mhm.
And we worked really hard in the beginning to keep him in inclusive environments. And so then I shifted my work and I started working as an itinerant teacher in preschools directly with children with disabilities in general education settings.
Mm.
So I followed them. They took me along this journey there.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, when conflict builds, you have to have something else to rely on. And special education just wasn't enough for me. And that was really, it was hugely surprising. When I was younger, teenage years, if I had struggles, I used writing as the method, the way to process and figure things out, just get it all out of my soul. And I abandoned doing that. I don't know. I don't know why, but I just
Because
did,
you were
right?
busy.
Yeah, I was a little busy. And
Yes.
actually, Benjamin brought writing back to me, not because I was using it as a way to, figure things out, but because I wanted to thank the providers that were working with him. So I started, at the end of like every year, I would write a poem that expressed my deep gratitude for whatever they were giving. And I would just, frame it or create a card with it so that it was a
Yeah.
really specific kind of gift for them.
What an amazingly creative thing to do. I'm sure they cherished that.
I think they did. One of his teachers told me she had like a whole table just filled with all the cards that I had given her. I mean,
Oh,
what an honor, right? What an honor. So when I'd really gotten past the height of conflict in parenting and settled down and was a little bit on the other side, and I thought, okay, now's the time to do this, to write the story. And as I was writing the story, it became obvious to me that there were things in my past from dance that were still very much living within me that I wasn't honoring and I wasn't paying close attention to. And the more I thought about it, the more I wrote about it, the more I realized that I could take these lessons that I learned in dance and
yes.
use them as life lessons. And it completely shifted how I approached conflict, how I looked at my children's disabilities, how
Mhm.
I viewed myself. It allowed me to release a lot of, shame and guilt and regret that I had. And
Oh,
I
I'm
wish
telling
that
you, that's a
everyone
common
gets
topic.
that.
It's
Yeah.
a common topic on this podcast, let me tell you. Guilt
Oh,
and
yeah.
shame, for sure.
Yes.
We're
Yes.
all trying to release that. So that's why I'm so excited about your book because it definitely has a different lens and a different perspective that I certainly haven't seen before. And I'm excited about that. So tell me a little bit, tell our audience about some of those life lessons from dance that you've been able to apply to your kids and to your work. I'm really excited to hear it.
Sure. So, one of the lessons that my teacher taught was to drop the weight, right? So, in modern dance, you use gravity as a means to generate movement. It's about going down to go up, whereas ballet is all about pulling up, 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 up.
Right.
Modern dance is about using gravity. And so he would stand in front of class and, lift up a leg and he would say, "How heavy is that leg? Pick it up and feel it, and then let it go." And so then, like, I can hear, the sound of everybody's legs, just dropping to the floor and their heels hitting the wood. So this was his way of talking about that. And in later years, I thought about this idea. It's really common when you're learning how to release your weight in dance to try to hold back. So if you think about like a ball, a rubber ball, if you drop it, it bounces and it rebounds, right? If you just simply move the ball down and touch it to the ground, it doesn't bounce, it doesn't come back up. There's no rise, there's no suspension, there's none of that.
Yeah.
And so it said to me, okay, you have to allow yourself to feel all the things that you feel, and that's okay. It's okay to go down, but it's better to know also that going down is not forever, right? You go down to go up. You will come back. You will have a rise, but
Hence
you
the
have to
title,
use that.
Fall
Right.
in Recovery. Yeah, I was
Exactly.
wondering where that title came from.
That's what it is.
That's great. Um, but you talk about how dance provided you strength and enlightenment too. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So, in looking at my children's experiences, like with my son Benjamin, we struggled for many, many years, whether or not it was a time to give him a feeding tube, for example, right? And there was always this tug, there was always disagreement with doctors, different doctors.
Mhm.
And we came to a point finally when he was about 14 years old where we knew in the not too far future he was going to have like a hip surgery. And he
Mhm.
was very thin, and we knew that he needed to gain weight. And so, we're thinking, is it time? And again, framing this in the way of dance, as a dancer, the job is to get on stage and to relay the message and the emotion that the choreographer wants you to.
Right.
It's not about you. It is not about any individual on the stage. And so, in framing this, I'm like, this decision about what Benjamin needs for medical, his
Mhm.
medical needs, it's not about me. It's not about how it's going to affect my life. It's not about how hard it's going to be to deal with the insurance companies and the medical equipment companies.
Mhm.
It's about Benjamin and what he needs.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it just allowed me to take myself out of the picture. That one message. And so there are many things like that that just
Mhm.
allow me to flip the view.
Yeah. And really getting a picture of it. So you told us a little bit about, how this book started coming about, but really, did you set out and say, okay, I'm going to write a book? Or did you start writing and then it became something?
I never ever intended to write a book, really. Even though I was the person that everyone, kept saying, you should write a book, you should write a
Mhm.
book. But what happened was a friend of mine who I knew through the New York City Board of Education. She was a college professor, and she was teaching women who were studying to become special educators. And she asked me to come and speak to them and talk to them about the parent perspective. And the first time I went and had a conversation with this group, like they all came over to me after and said, "You really have to write a book." And I
Mhm.
said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, I've heard it before. Sure, sure. In my spare time, I'll write a book." But I did a few of those talks. And, by like the third time, I thought, you know what? Other educators need to understand what's happening inside the brain of parents. So it's funny because initially the book was not, I knew parents were going to be an audience, but this was about connecting with other professionals because I feel like there's a gap there,
Yeah.
and it's a gap that I very much want to tighten up.
Mhm.
So, it started like that. And I had no idea how to write a book. I wrote poems, right? So I just made a timeline, and I just started putting things on the timeline, things I just absolutely could not get out of my head that stuck with
Oh,
me. So when memories, I feel like when memories stick with you, they mean something. You have to pay
right.
attention. So I just
Yeah.
wrote this chronological sort of story with these memories, and then I realized I needed to better understand the literary world. So I started to study, book publishing, and then I connected with a local writing group, and
Mhm.
started to take workshops. And over, 6 years, this book found itself. The more you spend time with art, the more it realizes what it needs to be. So, and
Oh,
in
I
that
love
time, I
that.
was Oh,
I love
I
that.
started, yeah, I really believe that. That's how I felt in dance, and that's how I felt with this book. And so I started then practicing writing essays. So I thought, okay, let me really hone in some story skills here. And I wrote one essay for Brainchild magazine called Bury My Son Before I Die. And I talk about, how Benjamin very well might die and that I'm doing everything I can to keep him alive, but that I'm also petrified about what happens to him if I die first.
Oh,
And the parent response blew me away. I thought this is a conversation I've had with family and friends and other parents. This seemed, like normal.
yeah.
But I didn't realize how sort of taboo it was for people. And
Mhm.
this one mom wrote to me and said, for the first time ever, I don't feel like a monster for having these exact same thoughts. And everything shifted in that moment for me too. I thought, like, okay, when I'm writing, I have to be brutally honest. I
Yeah.
have to write about the conflict. And
Yes.
I can't sit back and think that parents are living my life and shaming themselves for it. And
Mm.
so I really want parents to get that they're not alone and they can find a way to release that shame.
Hmm. Such a tough topic for sure. I mean, we all feel like we're living in the dark and nobody's really seeing us and it's so lonely. It's better now because people
Yeah.
can connect with the internet
Yes.
being what it is and social media. But I still find even with that that people are really only presenting a certain view of themselves.
Right.
There's not many of us out there who are being real and raw and just the uncut version. And I feel, and I'd love to get your perspective on this, that telling our stories is the key to all of that. And it's not just about exposing our stories to allies in the community who don't live our life, but it's really connecting with one another and saying the things that other people are afraid to say. And then having a conversation, opening that communication and that conversation around it. And as someone who did lose their child before I died, um, there is so much guilt and shame in the way that I feel. And I still have to work so hard at releasing it. And one of my recent podcast episodes, I talked about going to Alaska for 2.5 weeks with my younger daughter and how I could not stop feeling horrible about the fact that I can only do this because my daughter Elizabeth is not here. We never would have
Mm,
got this experience. We couldn't have gone away for 2.5 weeks. She couldn't have come with us.
right.
How can I enjoy myself? You know, but this is our life. This is what it is. And it helps me. And based on all of the messages I get, I believe it's helping other people to talk about it
Mm.
and to bring it to light and stop, hiding. So what's your perspective on this, telling our stories?
I completely agree with you. I mean, I think it's at the heart of connection, right? If how do you connect if you don't share your stories?
Yeah.
And I think otherwise there's just assumptions floating out there.
Mhm.
And people are also very good at masking, we
Mhm.
on social media, absolutely. I think in everyday life for sure. There's so many times I've said to my husband, I think we make it look too easy. Like people don't get it, like
Yeah.
they think we have it all handled. And,
Mhm.
we do in some ways, but it takes work
Yeah.
to get there.
Yes.
People don't, I say in the book, right? Like people don't get to look backstage. You don't see the dancers, you don't see the bloody feet. You don't see that part of it.
Yeah.
So I really think that the only way to make connection and truly understand others is to share your experiences and to welcome a dialogue.
Mm. I was thinking a lot about what you just said as I was getting ready for this interview with you, that having had my daughter who danced for 10 years, and it can be brutal at times, that in dance, they strive to make it look easy and effortless. I mean, that's your goal, right? You're never to show how difficult it is, that you're sweating, that, you know, you lift your leg effortlessly and it flows. And especially for her, she was ballet. Yeah, it's never supposed to look tough and rough and fragmented. It's all smooth and flowing and graceful and easy. And just the contrast with, while she was dancing, what our lives really look like at home, you know, what her body was really going through at a young age, trying to be that graceful dancer. Such a contrast. And it was interesting that you raised that point too. I don't want to leave this podcast interview without asking you about what you were able to do with Sebastian and D3 sports. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. So Sebastian in middle school was in self-contained classes, but he decided he wanted to make friends and that sports was going to be the way in. And, once you're middle school, if you haven't been involved in team sports, you're not going to be able to, jump in on that. So running became his passion, and he had a fantastic experience with it. And then when he got to high school, he continued. They were just fantastic. The coaches were like, everyone's welcome. That's it.
Mhm.
He worked hard and he made varsity by his senior year.
Mm.
And he, being around all of these other kids that were aspiring to go on to college and to be collegiate athletes, that put it in his head like, yeah, that's my dream too. And we weren't really sure how that was going to unfold because we
Mhm.
figured he was not going to go into a degree program in
Right.
college. Fortunately, schools are creating more and more inclusive programs now.
Yes.
So,
Yes, they are.
I started to look into those, but, I would call and they would say, no, 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 he can't compete because he's not going to earn a degree. NCAA rules won't allow it. And, as an advocate, my go-to is, to respect people in their positions, but to do my own homework.
Mhm.
So educate yourself. So I did a deep dive, I educated myself. And we were fortunate that the school he chose to go to, which is Gwynedd Mercy in Pennsylvania, they agreed to partner with us. And so I provided them basically with everything that they needed in order to, approach the athletic department. And then they had what they needed to approach the NCAA. And, it took a bit of paperwork and that was
Mhm.
all fine. But they came through with a waiver for him to compete. And then the NCAA said, you know what? Now that, this is in existence, anybody else at the school in the program who wants to compete can compete. And then they said, you know what? Anyone in the country in a Division III program, students with intellectual disabilities in integrated programs are free to compete if they're capable. So it was a huge win. It was not something we expected, but I'm
Wow.
very much of the mindset that when you advocate for one, you advocate for all. So
Absolutely.
thrilled.
Absolutely. That is so amazing. And you know what? I'm so grateful to you for doing that, for taking that on, because as we all know, it's exhausting living our lives, and it can be daunting because there's a lot of no's, and there's a lot of doors that get slammed in our faces, and we really um we really take it on the chin sometimes when we put ourselves out there. So you are brave and fierce, and we all thank you for that.
Aw, thank you.
So
Sebastian has done an amazing job. So, he did his part. Without him,
yeah,
I wouldn't have been able to do it.
yeah. Well, it started with his dream, right? You got to have that first. Then you
Yes.
follow that dream and you figure out how to make it happen, or how to at least
Yes.
move towards it and work on it. Um, But there's always those people in the beginning that say, nope, 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 can't do that. That's not how it works. And, you know, yeah, sometimes you can't come straight at them like a bulldozer. Sometimes you really have to come from a position of strength where you've done the research and the homework and you gather allies and,
Exactly. I mean, I
instead of
always say
saying,
like,
hey, I'm going to just sue you,
right, right.
this
No,
is another way to go, but
yes, yes, but that's difficult and not accessible to everyone, right? I mean, I always feel like the best way to get someone to say yes is to do as much as you can to make it easy for them.
right.
So that's always my goal. Like, what can I prep to just land it in their lap so that it's easy for them to accomplish? That's
And the
the
fact of
goal.
the matter is human beings are wonderful, creatures, and they genuinely love other people and want to help them. I mean, I know that's not 100%, but that is really close to 100% of people.
Right.
And when you give them an opportunity to do the right
Mm,
thing, they will jump at it.
yes, let them. Yes,
Yeah. Yeah. And
well
just
said.
the spirit of collaboration is always easier. You help them have ownership of the idea and the project, and instead of forcing it on them. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm really excited that your book is coming out on Tuesday. Everybody must go and buy this book and read it, and let's all rejoice with Joanne on, the things that she is able to pass down to us. Very hard fought life lessons that she has, been able to gather. So thank you so much for being on the show today. But one more thing. If you were to have one tip with all of your experience, both as a parent and as an educator, working from the little ones, the littles, all the way up to now, where you're like helping your son in college programs, what would be the one thing you'd want to tell families, moms and dads?
My brain just wants to go to a million places,
I
right?
know,
I
right? Because there's not any one thing for sure.
Yeah. Beyond just accepting that you're a human being doing the best that you can on any given day, I think one of the biggest things for me in terms of feeling successful with my kids is just reminding myself always to follow their lead.
Hmm. That's a very person-centered approach. I love that. Talk about that a lot on the podcast too.
Mm.
I think what I got out of this interview and learning about you as I prepared for this interview is that you're hopeful and you see possibility everywhere. And I love that. And
Ah,
I encourage people to get the book and to think through, where are you closing yourself off? Where do you have to open yourself up more to possibility? Yeah.
lovely.
Well,
Thank you so much.
thank you again, Joanne. Really appreciate it. It's great getting to meet you.
Likewise. Thanks.